Hey everyone, today we're going to be covering all of the big and exciting changes that 2024 has in store for us from the perspective of a support. There are going to be a lot of changes. I'm not going to be reading out every single change. I'm going to be covering three main areas: the neutral monster changes, the terrain changes, and the item changes. I encourage you to read the changes for yourself. I will link the notes down below. So let's start with the neutral monster changes. And the first one we're going to talk about are the Void Grubs and the Void Mites. So these are going to spawn at 5 minutes like Dragon currently does. 3 are going to spawn in the Herald Pit, and they each individually have a 4-minute cooldown. Now the max total Void Grubs they can be in the game is going to be 6. So it seems like this is going to give a global buff to your entire team, with giving you extra damage over time against structures. So the main takeaway for me from the Void Grubs is just going to be very dependent on its numbers, on how strong the numbers are for, how long the buff is provided, how much damage the buff provides for you, how easy it is to kill these Void Grubs, all of those things. If it is, in a healthy state, or if it's overtuned, then it could encourage earlier support roams. So at the moment, we're typically getting out active on the map 8 minutes and onwards, because currently in Season 13, Herald is very strong, which spawns at 8 minutes. Now, if these 5-minute Void Grubs are going to be very powerful, we're going to have to leave earlier. And Riot would probably make them overtuned rather than undertuned initially, just so that they are exciting, and so we all get to play around with their new toy. There's also a mini snowball aspect of this buff as well, so if you secure 5 or 6 of the Void Grubs, then you spawn some Void Mites to assist you in damaging towers as well. So there's a very real possibility that we are just going to be permanently roaming as supports, collecting Void Grubs, collecting dragons, and barely having a laning phase at all. The alternative is, if they're not that strong, then there's no Herald at 8 minutes anymore. Then the Herald now spawns at 14 minutes, and so then we could have almost an entire uninterrupted laning phase, which would just be a completely different experience. So we'll see how the numbers look like for the Void Grubs, but potential for big change. And now let's move on to the Herald. So, like I said, Herald is now no longer going to be spawning at 8 minutes, it's going to be spawning at 14 minutes, and it's adding a steering mechanic, so you can ride Rift Herald and kind of steer which way you're going. Similar to riding the cart in Arena or Nexus Blitz when those modes are out. It's a cool addition, it's a cool idea, but I don't think this mechanic sounds inherently broken, and it's unlikely to change our priorities as supports. And given that this Herald is now spawning after all of the turret plates have expired at 14 minutes already, this is probably not going to be the biggest priority, and definitely not as much as the 8-minute spawning Herald at the current time. Either way, it's unlikely that supports are going to be riding these Heralds to charge into towers anyway. Okay, so moving on to Void Camps. And so what happens now is that post 20 minutes, buffs are now global. You kill a red buff, post 20 minutes, your entire team gets red buff. You kill a blue buff, your entire team gets blue buff. Now this is going to be quite an interesting change for supports. Blue buffs and red buffs, these are something that supports very rarely get access to. This may make mages in like mid to low elo stronger, or enchanters across all elo stronger, because you can just sit there with your blue buff and just spam out your spells and have a really good time. It may also make certain specific champions a lot scarier, such as Senna support, who could use red buff very well. But it may also make you have to value your life a bit more, so that you're not donating a buff to the enemy team, right? And this could be a bit of a nerf to engagers, because you don't want to be valuing your life as much. You want to be comfortable engaging, dying, setting up your team for success. And engagers just aren't going to use red buffs or blue buffs nearly as well as ranged supports. So overall, this sounds like a slight nerf to engagers, a general buff to mages and enchanters, and quite a big buff to specific supports who may make a great use of red buff or blue buff. So the Scuttle Crab also becomes voidified post 20 minutes, and it has an extra mechanic now. So now when you kill the Rift Scuttler, there is going to be a big Scryer's Bloom effect, revealing champions and wards in a large surrounding area. So this is cool, this is a change. As supports, we're probably not going to be interacting with this new mechanic too much. This is mainly going to be laners and junglers. But the best time to use your execution of the Scuttle Crab is probably now, once the enemy is more on the map. You wouldn't want to get 0 value out of a giant AoE sweep, right? You'd want to get some wards swept out. So maybe we can communicate to our teammates to just chill on killing the Void Scuttle for a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about terrain changes. And the first terrain change we'll be talking about is the Baron terrain. And so what they've done is they've made 3 different forms of Baron, just like there are different Dragon Souls which alter the map at the moment. Now they're going to be different Baron forms, and the terrain around Baron is going to be different for each form. So this is one form, and this is the all-seeing Baron. And I think this is the most impactful change that we're going to see from the Barons. So I want to start by talking about what Baron Pit currently is like. It is completely closed in, it is very isolated. If you get stuck in the Baron Pit, there's no way out. And then we're going to compare that to this, right? We have an entrance from top side, we have an entrance from bot side. You don't have to commit all the way through the river to access Baron, right? Here, you really have to commit into the river. And so it's a lot more forgiving, this new all-seeing Baron. You have exit strategies in both directions. You can start the Baron in fog without even controlling river at all. This is going to feel great, in my opinion, for mages and enchanters the most, because these range supports were so vulnerable trying to hit Baron and not getting engaged on before. Again, the compare and contrast. Here, your team starts Baron. You can be positioning front to back. You're here. Your teammates are here. You're safe. When we're here, your teammates are hitting Baron, and you're going to be out here, and you're completely exposed to getting collapsed and killed on by the enemy team. And then necessarily, engagers are going to be a little bit annoyed by these changes because the enemies are going to have so many more avenues of escaping the Baron Pit. It's no longer a nice, juicy AoE wombo engage for you to pounce on. People are going to be more easily split up. They're going to get a little bit more fog and terrain to play around with, but in general, this is going to be a nerf to engagers and a buff to range supports. Now, another form of the Baron is just the standard Baron like it is at the moment, so obviously no changes for that one. And then the last one, there's going to be a bit of a wall in front. This is going to be pretty minimal at the end of the day. This is called Territorial Baron. So Territorial Baron, it allows for, engagers to play around with just a little bit more fog around this wall. Now you can look to engage from here, but there's not more fog to play around with. So there used to be more curves here to engage from fog, right? Up here. We can be channeling a Hex Slash or looking to engage from here or looking to engage from here. Now those corners are gone, and this is where we can look to engage from. It's just going to change it slightly, just a bit of a different dynamic, but I don't think this is going to be meaningful in any impactful way. The main thing that comes to mind is that the enemy team won't see if you are actually hitting the Baron. So if you have a ward out here, then your team can just kind of hide behind this wall, and then they have no idea if you're hitting Baron. Whereas with the normal Baron, if there's a ward in river, they know that you're going to be hitting Baron. Okay, and so now for more consistent terrain changes. For top terrain, like they said, they're going to make it harder to gank red side top. You can see they've kind of mirrored the terrain from blue side top to red side top. But it's still going to be completely diveable. And there's going to be a bit of a dot bush in top. And I'm not going to go into this too much. This is really not going to affect supports whatsoever. So let's move on to the jungle terrain changes. And so the most notable changes for terrain in the jungle are going to be these big flat walls in front of the pits. So here, big fat wall in front of the dragon pit. And let's go back up to Baron. And there's going to be a big fat wall in front of the Baron pit, which is just a little bit bigger and more centralized, if I'm not mistaken, than it currently is. But also the blue buffs are going to be more accessible. And so we can just easily move from bot river up through here and contest blue buff, or if we're pressuring around mid, we can just have such quick and easy access to contesting this buff that this could make both invading and defending this buff a lot easier, for both sides. So probably a more hotly contested blue buff, and this is going to be relevant for supports because if there's going to be more volatility around this buff, then of course we're going to leave our lane and help out. Especially as the game progresses, when we're spending more and more time around the middle of the map, and then we have this new avenue. Okay, moving on to the mid terrain, and so this is going to affect us quite a lot. Probably not too much in the laning phase, but the later the game goes on, the more time we're going to be spending around the middle of the map. And so what they did is they pretty much just moved the bushes further away, more towards the river than close to the lane. So they used to be here, now they're pushed out here. And this is going to hurt engagers. Unfortunately, another nerf to engagers. This is going to hurt Hex Slashing from these bushes to try and gank the mid laner. There's just too much space now. You're pretty much going to have to just try and run at them and try to gank them the old-fashioned way. I think overall this change is pretty reasonable. Mid is so easily influenced by jungle and support, so now mid laners can play around with a little bit more independence. But of course, more mid lane independence means less agency for supports. And this might encourage less camping around mid, less ganking, less playing around with mid waves, and more of an extended laning phase. I will say that in the mid to late game, when we are laning in mid, we are going to have our pinks probably in these bushes again still, and then it's going to be just a little bit of a buff for us. It's going to be nice to have some more access to the river, right? So we're closer to the river, we have guaranteed fog, closer to the river and to jungle and to action potentially up here, so worth noting. Okay, and what they did for bot terrain is they added a new little dot bush in the river, and this is going to open up a location that is most likely going to be hotly contested. This is going to be a fantastic pink location to catch this choke and the river and this choke as well. But it's not just that they added this bush here. They took away the bush that was against the wall really close to bot lane over here. And this is going to probably hurt high agency champions like engagers, like playmakers. Because what they used to be able to do with the bush from here is to pressure from here, right? You're going to be standing in here and then the enemy team doesn't know if you're going to be looking to, collapse on bot or if you're going to be roaming towards mid. Now it's just a lot more evident what you're doing. You're clearly in or out of lane. And this is going to be an indirect buff to mages and enchanters because there's going to be less threat from the side of the lane. Another interesting change they made is the wraparound gank from blue side against red side here. This is now possible. So they're just kind of mirroring out a lot of the terrain differences for each sides. If you were red side, you could just wrap around and flank on the blue side enemies. Now, if you're blue side, you can wrap around and flank on the red side enemies. I think this is just a nice change from them. It's not really going to change the meta too much or anything. But that additional path is going to make this dot bush all the more important to control. We can quickly talk about Infernal Drake changes. So there's going to be, these sort of bard chimes on the Infernal Rift where you pick these things up and it's going to give you adaptive force and movement speed and you're going to drop them upon death. There's nothing meaningful to really say from here. It's a very interesting idea. We'll have to see how the numbers play out, how long it lasts, how much stats it gives, the rate of spawn of these, everything like that. Okay, so let's move on to item changes. And the first thing to note is that they're removing mythics. Okay, cool. You can choose any item now. And of course, we're not going to have one item that is central to our build like mythics were. This is cool, but I can't really see this having a huge effect on the support meta. It's nice to have more flexibility in itemization as supports though. At the moment, it feels very pigeonholed in choices at the moment. It feels like the only items that exist are Radiant Virtue and Knight's Vow. And this is something that the support role has struggled with on and off for different metas. So let's just hope that the transition out of Mythics makes more items relevant for support. So let's just scroll up quickly and cover this new thematic item. It's going to be a tank support item called Trailblazer. It seems like somewhat of a reworked Dead Man's Plate, even though Dead Man's Plate is still going to be in the game. It's affordable, 2,400 gold, great, easily purchased by supports, but it has no ability haste at all, and it has ugly components. Winged Moonplate, Chain Vest, it's not going to feel good sitting on either one of those items. So we're going to pretty much have to hope for a great passive to make up for the lackluster components and lack of ability haste. And it's going to give you 20 movement speed while you're moving, so this is negligible. This is way too low, so this isn't really going to be about us moving faster. But when you are at max stacks, you're going to leave a trail that constantly raises your allies' movement speed. And so this could be quite powerful. 15% move speed, this is a percentage value, this is nothing to scoff at. And this could be an intangible that just increases the tempo of your team throughout the game, and you're barely going to be able to, physically notice its value, but it will have a lot of value. I don't think it's going to be as impactful in fights. I think this might have been the idea that they had for this item. You're kind of leading the way, you're engaging, and then people are, following up with your trail a little bit easier. But this isn't really how it's going to work, to be honest. You're not linearly running at enemies like this. You're going to be flanking, or you're going to be split up a little bit from your allies. And so I expect the main value we're going to find from this is just speeding up your jungler, speeding up your ADC, getting to places faster, having quicker tempo. So I think this is a cool idea for an item, but a pretty average execution so far. And now we're going to be talking about the support starting items. They are removing the starting items and they are just making a one-size-fits-all starting item, and then you can branch out and choose which direction you want to go after you get your quest completion. I'm not sure why they're doing this. This just seems like change for change's sake, but that's fine. Let's adapt to this. Let's embrace it. And so the starting item that all supports are going to have, it's going to be called World Atlas. And here are the stats. These are pretty spread out, and this is going to be a slight buff to, once again, range supports and a slight nerf to melee supports. Melee supports really want a bigger health pool and more health regen, and range supports are more able to use a wide spread of stats. Now, the next main thing to note about World Atlas is that it's going to be unifying your gold generation method as well. you can damage enemies and structures, kind of like Spell Thieves at the moment, or you can kill minions, kind of like Relic Shield at the moment. But the most important thing that I took away, it says killing. It doesn't say execute anywhere. And if we control F execute, it doesn't come up whatsoever. And so we should expect that there is no mechanic of execution built into this item. And now it just feels like we're coming full circle. If I recall correctly, the earliest iterations of these executing melee support items did not have execution. It was frustrating for the player base. It was awkward to try and last hit minions when you have no damage, no range, no anything. And so then they added some execution threshold, and it was pretty low. It was like 30% or something. And then eventually they buffed it to, 50%. And so now it's very easy to proc your Relic Shield or to proc your Shoulder Guards and to execute minions. Now we're just gone right back into the past. And while we don't have to rely on killing minions to generate gold, we can, trade against the enemies. What are melee supports supposed to do? Wardens, Engagers, how are they going to get gold? Are they going to walk up and try to last hit a melee minion with 20 damage auto attacks? Are they going to try to just commit to a trade to try and make some gold with the Spell Thieves component of this item? This is just going to be really awkward for melee supports. And it's disappointing and it's frustrating, and maybe I'm misreading or I'm overreacting or something, but this really feels like a step backwards for gold generation for melee supports. I also tested it out in PvE, and you're only going to get one stack, and that stack is going to happen on the second wave melees. And so this is relevant because at the moment, you get 2 stacks by the time that the second wave melees are around, and then you can execute those melees. You can get level 2 quickly, and Engagers have that big point of power in their game over ranged champions. Now, you have no execution, you have no way to consistently hit level 2 first against ranged champions, and that's going to be a big tool in your arsenal gone with the new season. Last thing of note for this item, and especially for killing the minions, is it gives you a flat 20 gold no matter what minion you kill, and it gives your ally the appropriate amount of gold had they killed the minion. And so now at least we're not stressing for killing melee minions or cannon minions only. We can kill any minion, but again, I'm not sure how we're supposed to access ranged minions to kill them in the first place if we're melee. So really not a fan of the support item changes. I think they missed the mark on this one, and I imagine that history might repeat itself and they just re-add the execution mechanic because melee supports are going to be frustrated. Now, once you get 500 gold on your World Atlas support quest, then it's going to transform into Runic Compass. This is kind of like the middleman between the starting support item and the completed lines of support items that you choose between. It's just going to give you a little bit more stats. And once we hit 1,000 gold, then we're going to choose between the 5 different support items. And so you get some more stats at 500 gold, and then you get some more stats at 1,000 gold of support quest, and then you choose. Okay, so for Celestial Opposition, this is kind of like a support Crown of the Shattered Queen, but for melee supports. It's going to give you a little bit of reduced damage initially, and then it's going to linger after the duration. And then you're going to unleash a shockwave that slows nearby enemies by 50%. So a bit of like a Randuin's Omen slow. This has a very short cooldown of 20 seconds as well. So this does look like a great option for Engagers. But we can also see that it has some self-peeling as well. Maybe we can put it on range supports. They don't get one shot, and then they slow enemies that are on top of them so that they can get away. This seems like a pretty versatile and well-designed and probably quite a strong option for supports. It is worth noting that the value of the damage reduction is going to be more for melees than for ranged. Okay, moving on to Solstice Slay. So this is a very strange item. If you CC an enemy, it gives you and an ally extra health and a burst of movement speed with a 20-second cooldown. It doesn't scream out for any champion in particular. We're going to have to see how all of the other items look, but I can imagine this could be useful on champions like Alistar to get that move speed to make sure that you land your E, or on kiting supports like Senna or Ashe or Bard. You get your slow off, you get a little bit of health, and you get that burst of move speed, and then you can kite around appropriately. I think this is a bit of a strange one, so we'll have to see how it feels. Moving on to Bloodsong. And so this is like a support Sheen with a little bit of press the attack added in there. It's going to be favoring melee supports again. Supports don't often get the luxury of finding too many auto attacks. So it could be great for those who do, maybe, like Leona or Nautilus or Alistar. You get your auto attack off in your combo, and then your teammates do more damage to them. You do a little bit more damage in your combo. I'm not convinced of this design. Anyway, let's move on to Dreammaker, and this is one for enchanters. It's going to buff your healing and your shielding. It's going to reduce some damage from a target that you heal or shield, and it's going to empower their next hit as well. It seems like these bubbles are applied no matter if you're in combat or not. So when you heal or shield an ally, they get 2 bubbles, one that blocks damage, one that gives them damage. Normally, these types of items for enchanters are only if you're in combat, like Moonstone or Echoes of Helia, but now, if you're just randomly healing or shielding your allies to get them to move a little bit faster or something, then you're going to put this on cooldown, so we're going to have to be a little bit careful of that. Otherwise, it has an 8-second cooldown. This isn't too short or too long. Not much more to say for this one. It doesn't seem that inspired or exciting. Just a bit of stats to your teammates when you enchant them. And then Zazak's Realm Spike. So this is going to be for mage supports. This is going to be Ludens in a way, tied in with a little bit of percentage health damage. So this seems very powerful, mainly because of the 3-second cooldown. This is quite ridiculous. Especially champions that can consistently proc this item. Champions like Xerath or Zyra, or maybe even Heimerdinger. This could be honestly meta defining. I think 3-second cooldown is quite ridiculous for something like this, especially because it's not just flat damage, it does have that scaling max health as well. And something that has been plaguing mage supports for pretty much the entirety of League's existence is their items are so expensive. They share these mage items with mages in the mid lane or wherever else. And they're just too expensive, but now they have a dedicated support item for them, affordable, strong. So I imagine this is quite a big buff to mage supports. For completed items, I'm only going to cover items relevant to support. A lot of these items are just going to be too expensive. If they're 2,900 or more gold, I'm just not going to talk about them for now. They would have to be absolutely broken out of their minds for supports to consider something like this. The first item that I am going to mention, Crypt Bloom down here. So this is 2,850 gold, and this is kind of like a Void Staff, but a little bit better for supports. I'm not sure if they're designing this specifically for supports, but you get Ability Haste, which is always amazing for supports. You get Magic Pen, and then you get this passive Life from Death. Whenever you get a takedown on an enemy champion, you're going to create a healing nova on their location, kind of like a Fiora ult that has been procced, that is going to heal allies. And so this is probably going to be a staple for mage supports, probably, you know, 3rd or 4th item. And also if there's a lack of alternatives, right? Because as we are going to see, Shadow Flame is going to be much more expensive. 3,200 gold, not doable by supports. Liandry's too expensive as well. And then Rod of Ages, this is affordable, somewhat affordable for supports, but these are just not stats that you want as a support. Assassin items, this is going to be practically irrelevant except for Pike support. There's going to be an energized attack for an assassin item that does a bunch of extra damage and slows them. I'm not the biggest fan of items that require auto attacks on Pike. The later the game goes on, the harder it is to get those auto attacks in. So this could be fine in the early and mid game. If you can get this done early enough, then it's going to be powerful and relatively affordable as far as assassin items goes. Opportunity, this seems like an item that is practically designed for Pike. 2,700 gold, incredibly affordable for lethality. This passive called Murder, after being out of combat, you're going to gain bonus lethality, and it's going to last after you deal a little bit of damage. And if you get a takedown of a champion, then you're going to get a bunch of decaying movement speed. So this is absolutely going to be part of Pike's build. For tank items, what's relevant for us, they removed Radiant Virtue, they removed Even Shroud, and those archetypes are just going to be found in the support items that we make a selection from instead. Hollow Radiance, irrelevant for support. We don't want anything with Balmy Cinder, and we don't want to kill minions either, so this is kind of useless. Unending Despair, seems like a replacement for Jack shows. Supports are not going to build this. Too expensive for supports. Way too expensive. Dead Man's Plate, too expensive. No ability haste, don't want to be touching this item. Force of Nature, relatively affordable, but again, no ability haste, and it's just too selfish with what it gives. No support, no utility. And so now we're going to get onto the enchanter items. Glowing Moat. This is quite a big change. There is a 250 gold item that gives you 5 ability haste. This is going to be really big for supports. You've heard me talk about ability haste probably 100 times in this video so far. Health and ability haste are the 2 most important stats for supports, irrespective of the class that you play. Range supports, melee supports, whatever. I'm expecting us to splash this item in whenever we can, especially if it actually builds into other relevant items. I would be surprised if it doesn't. Okay, and then moving on to the new enchanter item, Dawn Core. So this is 2,700 gold, gives a bunch of AP, gives a lot of ability haste, gives a lot of mana regen, and then its passives just give you more stats. Heal and shield power, AP, scaling off of base mana regen, and summon a spell haste. So this is just a complete stat dump of an item. This is very rare for League of Legends to have an item that is purely just passive stats. No extra interactions or mechanics or actives or anything. It is relatively expensive as far as completed items goes, because typically your support items are going to cost around 22 to 2400 gold, but these are a lot of stats. This is nothing to scoff at. I do want to take note that it doesn't give any ability haste. It gives heal and shield power, it gives AP, it gives summon a spell haste, but no extra ability haste. If it gave ability haste, this would probably be broken. Now I'm a little bit less inclined to call it strong. A pretty boring design, but we'll just have to see if it's relevant in-game. Echoes of Helia, so these have pretty great stats now, and as you can see, it's extremely affordable compared to something like the Dawn Core. It's going to give 20 ability haste, a lot of mana regen, health as well. Otherwise, it has a similar passive, it just has better stats. And it's also cheaper than before. I think the main issue for this item is just its identity. It's passive, it's quite unintuitive, and it doesn't really feel that good on a lot of different champions. But, you know, maybe we can play this on Sona or Janna or Bard now that it is such a great stat stick. I will definitely be trying this out on Bard. Moving on, Staff of Flowing Water. Very similar to what it is currently, but it has ability haste. So that's nice. It had 0 ability haste, now it has 15. That's cool. Otherwise, nothing really to take note of here. And fighter items, these are all going to be pretty much completely irrelevant for support. Okay, so all in all, the neutral monster changes and the terrain changes are big. I'm expecting a fun mix-up with the new season coming around. The game is always going to change, and we just have to adapt. We don't want to hold on to the past. Embrace change and make it your strength to adapt better than others. My main theory for the new season is that range supports came out much more ahead than melee supports for a variety of reasons that we did discuss. I'm hoping that I'm wrong, or that I am exaggerating the changes a little bit, because I do love having agency on engagers and playmakers. Otherwise, it could be a lot of fun to start exploring mage supports now that they have a bunch of mini buffs and a completely direct buff in terms of itemization. That's going to be fun. I hope you enjoyed, and I would love to hear your takes down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my Patreons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated.